Okay, this week we are talking about the magic of crystals, or I should say, the magic of crystals. So these things have magical power? Okay, well, if you look at various books like Agrippa's books of occult philosophy, apparently there is some kind of magical virtue attached to these things, right? So we're going to delve into that using these things in ritual. Um, so there's the glamorous aspect, and there's the sort of bro science aspect where you're supposed to have some kind of measurable, tangible impact from these things. And if you don't have anything measurable and tangible, then forget it, right? It's almost like these have to operate in terms of the material world, whatever that means, in order to work. So I guess I'm sorry to say it's really more like this. But the glamorous aspect is where the power's at. So I think Barbie wins in this case. All right. So we're going to talk about how that actually works. And to do that, we'll go to this excerpt from a Golden Dawn magical ritual. As you can tell, the Golden Dawn was quite verbose in its ritual. So let's just go ahead and read this. We know that the mystic temple, which was erected of old by wisdom, doth abide in the supernal triad. We know that the Shekinah, the cohabiting glory, dwelt in the inner sanctuary. But the first creation was made void. The holy place was made waste, and the sons of the house of wisdom were taken away into the captivity of the senses. We have worshipped since then in a house made with hands, receiving a sacramental ministration by derived light in place of the cohabiting glory. Is that cohabiting or cohabitating? And yet, amidst signs and symbols, the tokens of the higher presence have never been wanting in our hearts. By the waters of Babylon we have sat down and wept, and we have ever remembered Zion, and that memorial is a witness testifying that we shall yet return with exultation into the house of our Father. As a witness in the temple of the heart, so in the outer house of our initiation, we have ever present certain watchers from within, deputed by the second order, to guard and lead the lesser mysteries of the Golden Dawn and those who advance therein. And they may be fitted in due course to participate in the light which is beyond it. It is in virtue of this connecting link, this bond of consanguinity, that I have assumed the things which are without in the temple of the Golden Dawn into the things which are within the company of the second order at this meeting held at the equinox. So this comes from the ceremony of the equinox, which was conducted, surprise, surprise, at every equinox. There are two of those every year. One is in the autumn, beginning of autumn, and one is the beginning of spring. And the equinox is a time of year when the day and night are more or less of equal length, and there's a period of about 3 days of balance, where day and night are about the same length. Okay, that's a very important time in which to have this sort of link between the inner and the outer. And so this may seem like very dense, impenetrable prose to some, but as you can see, there's a sort of yearning to get back to where we were, like let's say back into the Garden of Eden or something like that, right? And the key here in terms of crystal magic is that where it says, and yet, amidst signs and symbols, the tokens of the higher presence have never been wanting in our hearts. Okay, so it is this idea of the token that gives the crystal its power. Okay, it's not very impressive looking on camera, is it? This is very sparkly, actually. All right. So what is a token? Right. Well, a token is like a keepsake. Like if you go on vacation somewhere, there's very often a gift shop. If it's a tourist trap, and you can buy various souvenirs and bring them back, and then you can put them on your office desk, and you can look at them, and just having them there conjures up the memory of that experience of being away on vacation at that very special location. Okay. And in terms of where we used to be as spirits or souls or something like that, this is assuming that we have fallen into the material realm from somewhere. Okay. And so we've fallen into this realm, and we really don't have anything that we have taken from wherever it is we came from, this higher plane, whatever it was, right? And yet there are things around us that are like tokens, okay? So we kind of have just the memories of that place in our hearts, okay? And there are things in this, fallen state, supposedly, this material world, that remind us of where we came from, okay? That higher spiritual state, okay? As though we fell into this world from some higher state of mind or being, okay? Well, one of the keys to the mysteries is that we didn't really fall into this world or come into it from some other place. We came out of this world, okay? But there's a deeper state of being that is not really of this external world of vibration and, hard surfaces and hard knocks and things like that, right? And from that inner state, which is more like a dream state, we really can't bring anything out of those dreams with us as keepsakes. But there are things in this world that remind us of that world, okay? And they act sort of like souvenirs, okay? So in that sense, if a crystal, this is a moonstone, looks much more impressive in person than on camera. It kind of resembles the moon. And so these crystals have sort of aesthetic triggers to them where they remind you of some deeper experience. And as such, they supposedly then carry forth the experiences of the higher planes into this world. Okay, sort of like tokens, like keepsakes, like souvenirs, okay? So in that sense, they're merely symbolic. So I've fallen into this outer state of being, let's say, and then I find something in the world that reminds me of some kind of inner landscape of experience, and it's merely symbolic of that experience. So I keep it to remind myself of that, okay? And in that sense, it really doesn't have any connection to where I came from. It simply reminds me of that place, okay? Now, that's the way we see it from an exoteric perspective, okay? From the uninitiated perspective, okay? The way the adept sees these things is that they actually are gateways back to that experience. And I know that's a really strange idea, okay? But the key to that comes in what's actually happening when you look at these things, okay? And when the way you work with them, you have to work with them like the initiate does. And I'm going to give you the key to that. It's not that hard, really, to understand how these things can be seen as literal conduits to spiritual power. And you can see that when we work in ritual, all kinds of things can work as keepsakes or tokens that remind us of a higher spiritual dimension. So the various instruments of ritual that we use, like the wands, the cups, the daggers, the swords, including the smells, like the scents that we have for oils and incenses. Fire has a certain quality to it that reminds us of some inner landscape. And of course, the pillars and the various furniture we use in the temple, the altars and things like that. Okay, and supposedly certain kinds of sacred alphabets can conjure forth memories of some kind of primordial existence that was from some deeper plane of existence. All right, and of course, substances like blood or wine, they can symbolically represent um, the sacrificial nature of the universe, how the essence of the universe has been spilled out into the open, is now revealing itself, is sort of like the spilling of blood. Okay, and we've talked about that in the last video, which was called The Blood of the Gods. Okay, and also talked about it in a video before that, where the use of blood in magic, or the celebration of the Eucharist, where Christians drink the blood of their God and eat his flesh. Even the breath, of course, is also a keepsake from some deeper realm of experience. These are all tokens, things that we can use to remind us of deeper levels of consciousness. Okay, this is Tantra, by the way. Tantra insists that everything that exists outside in the physical world can be utilized as a vehicle toward enlightenment, or towards some higher state of being, or some deeper state of being, some reconnected state of being. Sounds and colors and vibration, all these things can serve as tokens or souvenirs or symbolic remembrances of some deeper state. And of course, crystals are really good at that. Okay, sometimes. And it depends on your own, psychological makeup. Some things will work better for you than others. And it's one of the reasons that the Golden Dawn had such brilliantly colored ritual implements, like their wands and their swords and their admission badges and their banners, very bright primary colors and vivid purples and bright gold and things like that. Yeah, there's a reason for all that. So memory and imagination, if you look closely at these two concepts, they really are very much the same. In order to remember something, you simply reimagine it. Okay, and one of the harder things to realize about imagination is that it is always operating. People tend to think of imagination as something that you reach for when you plan your wardrobe or you're redecorating your house. You close your eyes and you imagine what it might look like. Okay. No. When you look at your house with your eyes wide open, the imagination is presenting that house to you right now through the senses. It's taking all that sensory input and then dressing it up and presenting it to you. So the imagination is always on. And so when people tell me that they can't visualize, if you had any idea how absurd that sounds, it's kind of like saying you're blind and you can't see anything. So when you say you can't visualize, it's like, of course you can. And usually what I say is, close your eyes and walk into the kitchen without touching anything. You've walked into the kitchen so many times, you can probably easily do that with maybe stubbing your toe once. But in other words, in order to do that, you would be visualizing where things are. Okay. The interesting thing is that blind people actively visualize all the time. They're really good at it. Okay. But even if you have your eyes open, you're still visualizing your way into the kitchen, but you are now dressing up the sensory input in some kind of visualization, which means that the imagination is always on. You're always imagining the world. Okay. So now if you close your eyes and remember some place you once visited, then of course you are now visualizing that without any sensory input, or you're doing that from the memory of a sensory input. Okay, but this happens even while you're looking at the world through your eyes right now. A lot of the things you're seeing all those images are being colored by your past memories and perceptions. Okay, so why am I going into all this? Okay, well, soul and imagination are kind of the same thing. So we're going to talk about experiencing the world in terms of the soul, because that is the key to seeing these crystals as literal conduits of power. Okay, and it's not just crystals, it's anything at all. Okay, so even a mug, which I often am drinking from here during these videos, um, has a certain soul quality to it. And as you look at this, even on the video screen, your mind is throwing significance at this. Okay, oh, it's rather rustic looking, but has a slight modern look to it. No, something like that. Like um, these soulful qualities are sort of erupting from this thing in your imagination, let's say, or being projected upon it. Okay, we should be careful with the idea that saying, oh, you're just projecting things onto this. All right, because that would presuppose that your soul is inside your body and now projecting things out into the world. That's not necessarily true. All right. So to remember is to imagine. And so when we use various substances or appearances in ritual, these are things that trigger, let's say, deep memories or deep imaginative experiences that sort of recall a state of being that we used to have, or even a state of being that's possible for us right now, that exists right now, which is kind of being, kept at bay or shuffled away somewhere, and which can be conjured forth to be here now. Okay, and so I think you're starting to see maybe what I'm saying. These various symbolic substances or symbols themselves, when looked at in a certain way, they themselves right there can act as conduits to deeper experiences, okay? And that experience can arise as energy now. Another way to look at this is you remember. So you recognize and you remember, or you remember. So somehow in the creation of the universe, these various experiences out in the world have been dismembered from their inner state of being. And now they're out, sort of exploded out into this sort of material realm, right? And then, but then there's a certain way of looking at these things that remembers them. They've been dismembered, they've been sort of cut off from God or whatever, right? But there's a way of looking at them that recognizes where they used to be, maybe. I know what this was like. I know that this sort of color and suggestion of texture, it reminds me of something like a deep memory or something deep within myself that I have now been cut off from. And in that recognition, that inner experience can now come forth. Okay. Does it come forth in the stone itself? Okay. Some people would say, no, you're just calling to memory, and it's happening inside you. But remember, whatever you're looking at is inside the imagination. The imagination is not inside your head. You are inside the imagination. Okay. When you can exist in the world that way, without assuming that your mind is trapped inside your body, then remembering the deeper aspect of something like this, you can begin to call forth its inner aspect right here in the hand, because this outward experience really isn't outward. And so to the adept, that begins to become a reality. How is this possible? Well, there are things in the world that are better at conveying a sense of soul than other things. Okay? And in our modernistic lifestyles, we have pretty much dismissed the soul as unreal. Why is that? Well, kind of because the soul isn't real. Okay, and we should talk about what we mean when we say real. Okay, we need to rescue, the soul from its imagined unreality. Okay, and so yeah, when we look at a crystal, we can sometimes get intimations of outer space because many crystals are transparent and they have this nebula-like appearance to them. So there's a spaciousness to them, and that freedom that we supposedly had when we were in some kind of higher spiritual state might sort of appear there in the crystal to us. For an instant, maybe we recognize it. Now, there are various settings that we can go into that some settings have more soul than others. Okay, this is a pretty cool example. If all these elements combined producing a particular effect, there's an industrial quality, there's a rustic quality, okay, there's a bit of an archaic quality there with the Persian rug, things like that. And that sort of conjures forth a room full of some kind of quality or presence, sort of postmodern sort of spirit there. And it's interesting too because if you've spent time in settings that have been crafted to convey soul, you begin to develop a sense for it. There's a certain thickness in the atmosphere that you can begin to feel when you are working around in settings that have been crafted to convey soul. This is an actual photograph. It's not a painting. This is Juniper Springs in Florida. I've been there several times. I know it's real. Yes, there are places on Earth that actually look like this. And you can see there's certain settings convey something to us, like there's something magical, like this is like, I could almost go into that vivid turquoise greenish color. It's like almost like a gateway to some inner experience, some deeper experience. Now, there might be some kind of evolutionary explanation for our attraction to this color of the water, the turquoise water, because this turquoise colored water tends to be very healthy and clean water. So there's a tendency for us to be attracted to it because it's good for us. Whereas water that doesn't have this color could be polluted, dirty, or full of microorganisms and silt and things like that. But this is basically because water that becomes structured because of its water actually becomes a liquid crystal. Okay, there are two phases of liquid water, not just one. H2O is what we normally consider water, but there's also H3O2. When water structures itself, it assumes a liquid crystal form, which has a negative charge. It's electrically charged water. And when it has that quality, it actually feels wonderful, if not a bit cold, to jump into. And we just don't know why. We can't quite explain why it's so supercharging, but it's actually the electricity in the water. Okay, it has a negative electric charge, so we absorb ions from it. This water is good for you, and this is why certain springs have reputations for healing properties. Most likely, that's why. That's why. There are other qualities of soul that various springs carry, though, that go beyond the mere explanation of the electric charge in the water. And then suddenly, lo and behold, we have this color turquoise, which we are so attracted to. I wonder why that is. So sometimes there's an evolutionary explanation, like we're attracted to these colors because that color of water, we developed a natural affinity for it because those who are attracted to this color in water would have a better chance of surviving drinking that water. Okay. And so turquoise, I hope I didn't just take the mystery out of turquoise. Turquoise being a crystal that supposedly has a lot of spiritual significance or power, especially in terms of Venus. Supposedly, it corresponds with Venus, usually, perhaps Jupiter a bit. And works of art also convey soul. Okay, and this is very important. Impressionism, in particular, does this. This is a painting by Monet, and what you might notice is that the air or the sky seems to have more texture than even the water does. The water seems to be like an opening into space right there, like we could just pass right through that green stuff growing on the surface and just pass right through into the water as though that's just space there. Whereas the air looks like we could just reach out and touch it, or we can just reach out and touch that sky. And this kind of painting conveys that thickness of soul. What this means is that when something conveys a lot of soul, you begin to sense the imagination itself. Okay, so if you're in a room that has a lot of soul in it, you begin to notice the imagination itself conveying forth something like that deeper memory or something like that. So if you look at the sky, if you look at it in just the ordinary exoteric way, it's like, well, it's out there and it's just nothing there. It's really nothing there at all. If I reach up, I can't touch it, blah, 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 right? Well, looking at that like an adept, it's like, no, that's right here. The soul and the imagination is all here, all around me, right up against me, and it is packaging forth and presenting to me the imagery of the sky. So that experience of the sky is right here up against me, and it begins to feel thick. Okay, the soul has an almost viscous quality sometimes to it. Okay, and those of you who have done hallucinogens and things like that will sometimes maybe experience sort of thick, soulful quality that can arise from certain atmospheres, or from certain settings, or from certain substances. And I really like this word effulgence, which simply means like, radiant or full of light. Effulgence, that's a word that conveys that sort of fullness of the light, that it is this manifesting medium. Okay, I would like to think that light that exists at the level of Berea, if you have studied your Kabbalah, has this effulgent quality to it. It's very full of itself. It's very full of deep memory and soulful experiences of the beyond. And I've talked about this a little bit before. Why is it that when we look at the world, we can't experience this soulful quality? It's almost like it's just emptiness and there's nothing really there, like it's not real. Okay, and if I look at a crystal, it's like, well, I'm just imagining some special quality in that, and imagination isn't real, so that means the crystal has no magic power. Okay, you have to remember that imagination is real. It is the only thing that you ever experience, actually. Okay, remember that the imagination takes the sensory input and packages it forth to whatever it is, this awareness, right? And so the imagination is always on as a sort of conveyor or as a medium between you and what you are supposedly seeing. Imagination is always there. But in the exoteric view, everything is split in two, right? There's just matter and spirit, and that's all there is to it. And this, of course, spirit and matter like this represents the fallen state. I have fallen into this world, and all I have are things that remind me of where I came from. Yeah, and these things aren't really, they don't have any special magical power, right? Because they only remind me of that. They're merely symbolic. Okay. What a shame that we should end up in a state like that, because that is not what is happening here. So scrap this model, right? Okay, so when we return back to the idea of metaxy, which is the way the ancient Greeks supposedly saw the world, it wasn't just spirit and matter, it was spirit, soul, and matter. There was a sort of medium of conveyance between the highest world and the lowest world. And that sort of effulgence or fullness that you feel when you experience soul or when you're in a soulful environment, okay? You might notice if you've ever been to a Broadway musical, the incredible richness of the stage props and the fullness of that experience with the music and everything, all that combined, has a very is a very tangible, thick quality to it, and that's what makes it so magical, right? We pay a lot of money for that, when in fact, that that experience of soul is available to us all the time, and we can orchestrate our own environments to make them full of soul. And we can use crystals and other things to do it. Doesn't have to be natural substances. You can use, synthetic paint and things like that, and create sigils with ink and whatnot. And these can also convey soul to you, because as you look at them, you are reminded of that inner experience, and of course that inner experience is right there. It says, "I'm right here. I'm right here. Do you want to call upon me? Okay, let's come. I'll come out right now." And then it's because remember, there really isn't a split between spirit and matter. Okay, the world has manifested this way as though they are separate, but they are not. They are not separate. Okay. This is the key to magic, seeing everything in terms of soul, which basically gives crystals their amazing magical power. This is obsidian. Do they have magical power in and of themselves in a scientific way? No, 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 no. In the act of looking at these things or staring into them, it is the soul itself that you are now realizing is there, and it's that effulgence that now comes through. Okay, so it's not really in the crystal. It's in your experience, and of course, certain things can help to conjure forth that soulful experience. Certain things can do that better than other things. Okay. Interesting thing is, if you have an environment that doesn't have a lot of soul in it, you can't really escape from that, okay? But there is a type of soul that imagines itself not to be real, that sort of like destroys itself, right? And so that quality of soul is usually what we are existing in the exoteric or unenlightened world, okay? So if let's say if you're in an auto garage, that tends to be very like fixing cars and stuff like that. It tends to be a not very soulful environment, you would think, right? But of course, that environment also has its own type of extreme practicality, the hardness of all the tools, the harshness of the environment and the loud noises. These are all soulful qualities too. Yeah, that's so they part of that can even be sort of hellish type of experience, the harshness of it, right? Or not. It can be maybe like conjure up memories of the forge of the gods or something like that, right? And of course, now soul doesn't really exist between spirit and matter. It basically fills up everything as a means of uniting them together. Okay, so supposedly when the divine created the universe, it sort of opened up a space within itself in which it appeared not to exist, so that it could pour things into that space and then have things manifest within it. Okay, but that space where that space where the divine doesn't exist, that's an illusion. Okay, it's pretending not to exist there so that things can arise. Okay, and when you look at the world in terms of soul and look at your various crystals, then some things can help you remember that better than other things. This is malachite. It's beautiful green. It doesn't really show up so well in the camera here. And that certain experiences, certain sigils, certain magical implements, their shapes and their symbolic forms can, or certain smells, fire, the different elements, water, things like that, can conjure forth deeper experiences. Not from within themselves, but from within the depths of the universe itself, or from in the depths of imagination. Imagination, which is everywhere. It's not trapped inside you, okay? You exist inside imagination. Imagination does not exist inside you. You are an imagined being. Do you really exist? No, not in the way you think you do. You imagine yourself to exist in certain ways. Okay. All right. Anyway, and of course, spirit and matter interact in this medium of the soul through vibration and patterns of interaction. And this realm of the interaction of spirit and matter is the realm of the soul. Okay. So does the soul exist? Not exactly, no. It is the vibration pattern between spirit and matter. And to experience this realm of soul is to experience that effulgence, the vibration, or that fullness, right? That I don't know, it's hard to describe. And then, of course, certain crystals have a reputation for really conveying that soulful experience, certain types of character of the soul, right? Yeah, amethyst is one that really does, that's pretty powerful. And so you would think that when people talk about the magic of crystals, there's this scientific attitude that takes over. This is the exoteric, uninitiated attitude that says, well, the magic is inside the crystal and it's radiating out from the crystal, something like that, right? No, the magic is in the recollection or the remembering. So in the act of looking at the crystal and experiencing it, holding it, touching it, the whole experience there is conjuring forth that energy, okay? To reach out and touch it and not look at it, that's not quite right. And people would say, well, I should be able to sense the vibration coming from that stone, right? Well, yes, but you have to really look at it the way that people tend to normally experience that. You have to involve all the senses that normally are responsible for that soulful experience, okay? And then within that medium of imagination that's working there, there's your connection to the inner realms, not through the stone itself, let's say. You can see why this has become so difficult to talk about. Because if you were to tell an adept that the energy doesn't exist within the stone, he would say, yes, it does, but not in the way you're thinking. And so you would think that if you sat inside a gigantic geode, like this is amethyst, that would be like, oh, I'm sitting inside a sparkling galaxy or a nebula, right? Not necessarily. You would have to engage with this experience in a soulful way. Okay? And it is interesting that certain substances have an effect that you can't quite figure out. For instance, if I were to scry using a plastic bowl of water, I might get one particular effect. And if I scry using an iron cauldron with water in it, I get another kind of effect. That character of the iron has a powerful influence there, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly how that's coming forth. Some would say that if the plastic bowl looked like iron and I didn't know that it was plastic, then I would get that same iron experience. I'm not so sure of that. These things are a bit more mysterious than that. And there you go. This is why crystals have a special reputation for being magical, right? There's sort of that holographic image in a star sapphire that it's funny because nowadays, oop, where'd it go? Oh, it seems to be gone now. I don't know how this multimedia stuff works. There it is. Okay. That's almost a cheesy effect now. It's almost a little bit vulgar. It's kind of like looking at one of those little hologram images now. But star sapphires are still considered very valuable. Oh, disappeared again. This is citrine, that golden color. It's a type of quartz, and I find quartz to be particularly powerful as a ritual implement. Funny thing is, I've got these various stones in front of me, and they don't feel right without a clear quartz crystal sitting in there among them. That's probably my Kabbalistic conditioning. You know, this would represent Kether as the essence of all the other stones, something like that, right? If you know your Kabbalah, you know what I'm talking about when I say Kether. And this is obsidian, which is a great scrying stone, supposedly. It's absolutely black. It's not a crystal, actually. It's volcanic glass. Glass is a crystal. I think it's a form of quartz, but if glass cools very quickly, it doesn't assume a crystalline form. And if it's volcanic and has lots of ash or something in it or carbon in it, it'll become a black or smoky quartz like these, which are supposedly really good for scrying. Okay. Funny thing is, glass is actually a liquid. It's not a crystal. Unless it's of course crystal glass. Yeah, that kind of crystal, like a crystal goblet. But glass is actually a liquid, scientifically speaking. Windows that are very old are actually thicker at the bottom of the pane than they are at the top, because over time the glass very slowly flows. And there's malachite. This captures it a little better. I have some malachite here. It just doesn't quite. This is quite beautiful, but it doesn't really show up on camera so well. So, yeah, malachite naturally conveys a remembrance of Venus because of that green color. You could say green for the jealousy of the goddess Venus, right? Or green for Netzach. And of course, for Venus, we also have, this is rose quartz. Has a slightly pink color to it. And pink being reminiscent of the color of maybe affection, or the color of sensual lips, or the vagina. So representing sort of feminine or quality of tenderness or affection that Venus is so well known for. So you have to remember that if you're in an auto mechanic's garage, that's a hyper real sort of environment where we're dealing with, you know, the hard facts of fixing car engines. Okay, but remember that all these various settings, these are still fantasy worlds that we live in. And so when in the modern world, when we say, oh, we've dispensed with all the fantasy and all the magic now, we know it's not real, right? And so now we live in the real world. Okay, so you can't escape from imagination. Basically, what's happened there is that the imagination is now imagining itself as unreal, and it's proceeding as though it is unreal. And then all we have is literally what's sensorially conveyed to us. We pretend that the only thing that's real is the hard sensory data, supposedly, that's there, when we don't even realize that as that sensory data is sinking in, it's being dressed up by the imagination anyway. Okay, so to look at crystals and say they can't possibly be magical because, well, that's to exist in this world in which the imagination is pretending it's not out there doing things, or it's not an intermediate realm between myself and what I'm seeing. If you live in the world of realism, You're living in a world of fantasy because you are living in a world in which the imagination is imagining itself as unreal. Okay. And once we stop doing that, once we stop imagining that the imagination isn't real, the imagination then comes forth again in its full splendor. It's right here, up against us. And we get this intense, vivid experience of everything as conveying immense depth and remembrances. Everything conveys astonishing depth or power or meaning, or it's hard to say exactly what that is, okay? And all of these things of like, oh, I remember what it was like to be, before I was alive. I know what that was like. It's like, well, that's not really from before. That's now too. You can conjure forth that experience now. It's everywhere. And crystals are a great way to do that. In fact, the ultimate state or the ultimate ground of being is the same thing as the philosopher's stone. And the philosopher's stone, we use the metaphor of the stone because the ultimate truth or the ultimate ground of being is absolutely indestructible, absolutely hard, absolutely firm, absolutely right up against us. Hmm. Hmm. So, if you pretend to be realistic, you are pretending. Okay? That doesn't mean you can't operate in a sort of literalistic mindset. That's perfectly fine. But of course, that's still something that's being imagined. Which brings us to emotions. So when we work with crystals, I say, well, it's conjuring forth various emotions, right? Or various thoughts, things like that. No, 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 no. So if let's say I'm doing meditation, one of the practices in meditation is to label the emotions that you're experiencing as they come up, which can be very helpful, okay? Or to label the thoughts, the types of thoughts you're having. Oh, that's a self-defeating thought. Okay. Oh, or label the emotions. Oh, that's jealousy. Okay, you wouldn't even say that's jealousy. You would just say, oh, jealousy. Jealousy is arising. Okay, or oh, I'm remembering what it was like to be a child. Okay, childhood memory. Okay, you're labeling thoughts, right? Well, thoughts and emotions are abstractions. Okay, and if you look at what an emotion actually is, it's always attached to some kind of imagery. The entire world is imagistic, and all of your thoughts are also at the very root imagistic. They are really images or scenarios that are presenting themselves to you. I don't really understand why people say that um, why people think of their thoughts in terms of sentences. Like the thoughts that arise in my head they always come in the form of sentences. They don't. No, they arise as scenarios, mostly dualistic scenarios in which something is happening to something. Okay. And so when we just label the kind of our experiences, we kind of tend to dismiss them. Okay, and so when we work with crystals and things like that, or with fire and water and breath and air and the various senses, we are immersing ourselves in the imagistic realm again, where thoughts are not really what's going on. There are just scenarios and conjured images and remembrances and things that just come forth from these experiences of just gazing upon these things and interacting with them and holding them, feeling the weight of them. These are imagistic experiences. This is a paraphrase from Thomas More, not the Thomas More from Renaissance times, but Thomas More, more recent. So we have the soul combines body and mind. So if you're meditating, there's a tendency to focus on the mind and say the mind's doing this, the mind is doing that. Well, it might be better to focus on the images that arise. And of course, what is imagery exactly? So just labeling your thoughts and feelings is not enough. It's important to experience the images and the scenarios themselves without attaching words, labeling all over them. Okay, and you have to remember that images, if you are educated in terms of literature, imagery that arises in a poem or a story is not only visual imagery, it is also sensory. The weight of something, the texture of it, all right, the smell of it, the sound of it. So imagery is the immersive experience of imagination. Okay, and that's why working with things like this that words cannot really capture is really important in magic. Okay, and once we have those experiences, or we're calling them forth through these kinds of objects or symbols or whatever it is we're using, yes, we can attach words to those experiences and use the words themselves to conjure forth that experience again. That can work too. But it's important to have an imagistic basis from which to do that. A memory of some kind or an experience of some kind, okay? So as the Golden Dawn rituals, neophyte ritual says, by names and images are all powers awakened and reawakened. This is what that means. And this is something I invite you guys to do. One of my favorite crystals to work with is salt. I dare say it's one of the more powerful crystals to work with, but this is mainly, my experience of it. Try getting some large chunks of, what is this called? Himalayan salt, the pink salt, and maybe like 24 chunks of it or 30 chunks of it. And then for your ritual space, lay them out in a perfect circle that you stand within to do the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram and the middle pillar and things like that. And then notice the effect that has, okay? And you might notice yourself saying, oh, I don't feel any energy coming from these salt crystals. But then you'll catch yourself in the act as like, wow, this whole setting is much better now because of this enchanting quality and the color of these rock crystals. And then your mind's going to try to get all scientific all over it and say, am I deriving energy from the crystals? It's like, no, you're deriving energy from that whole aesthetic, atmospheric experience. Okay? And yes, the salt crystals are part of that. Okay, and they're not separate from that. But it's easy to misunderstand, like, oh, if I hold the crystal, now I'm deriving energy from it. It's like, no. You are deriving the energy from the holding of the crystal, not from the crystal itself, from the experiencing of it. All right, so I probably just confused that whole issue drastically. So I hope that clarifies what the magic of crystals actually it comes from. Okay, so do you need to use crystals in your ritual? No, of course not, but I certainly recommend it, especially if some of them speak to you. All right, try salt. Go to the crystal store, like a rock store, a rock and gem store, okay, or a New Age store, and actually look at some of these stones, okay, and then go request to touch them if they're behind glass. Request to look at them and hold them. And you can be surprised. Like if you ever hold amber in your hand, it's like, wow, this is such a strange experience to actually hold a chunk of amber. Okay. Anyway. All right. Until next time.